I put my hands up in the air and reached up to heaven. And I'm floating away in what I call perfect blackness, a velvety, encompassing, peace-generating blackness. I remember this so clearly. The next thought I had was, "You're dying." And then, being a longtime editor and grammarian, I said, "Actually, you're not dying. You're dead." And all I was left with was peace and a sense of just joy, a sense of lightness. It's like all those heavy earth weights had been dropped from me. I felt a very massive presence join me, and that presence was very tall, to my left and slightly behind me. And I remember turning my head to see who had joined me. I said, "And who are you?" And the answer was, before I could even finish the sentence, the answer was, "You, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original." And I thought, my whole life, I wondered what it meant to be made in the image and likeness of God, but now I got it. My story is a little bit different because it started with a trauma. In 2016, my beloved husband ended his life at our home, and I went off the deep end, to say the least. And then it's funny, I had these three prayers I prayed every night. One of them was, "God, either heal me or let me go." Two was, "I can't handle any more tough decisions," because there's a lot of decisions to be made after a spouse passes on. And three was, "Spare me the life review." I had been fascinated by the story of near-death experiences and had read everything from Raymond Moody, Life After Life, to Betty Eadie and George Ritchie and Daniel Brinkley. Read all those books again and again. So I knew we'd get a life review, and I had one of my daily prayers was no life review, because prior to my husband's death, I had been, kind of a quasi-successful author. I'd enjoyed some success as a writer, editor, and all that. And then after my husband's messy ending, I just I went to a very bad mental state. So I certainly didn't want to see that on the life review. And there were times I did not behave in ways that were typical to what I consider to be my natural self, my what's the word? I don't know, my normal self, I guess. And then gosh, this went on for 29 months, and then I started having some physical problems, a lot of them actually. And I went to the doctor, and they diagnosed cancer, and it was stage 2. It had already spread a little bit. I remember saying in a prayer, I was very clear on this. I want either heal me or let me go. In other words, let me die. But I meant quickly. Let's, snap, snap. Let's not linger. So I was pretty devastated. And then it was subsequent to a relatively minor surgical biopsy to determine best treatment and what was going on, that somebody made a little boo boo. And when I woke up from the procedure, I was in a hospital bed, and they sent me home. And I said, "Well, wait. Something ain't going well here. Something's wrong, bad or wrong." And they said, "Oh, no, once you get home, you'll be fine." I keep meaning to look up the statistic, but women, there's a high rate of women who die from heart disease and heart attacks because we're sent home and admonished that that's anxiety. You're not having a heart attack, that's just anxiety, or you're just upset, or you need to calm down, or all this other stuff. And I did. And once I was home, things went from bad to worse, and I was really bleeding a lot. And I realized I was bleeding to death, that I wouldn't last long at that rate. So I actually, it's kind of funny. I was standing in my shower because, when you're bleeding out, housekeeping is paramount. I didn't want to I had really pretty, almost new white carpet in my house, and I didn't want to mess it up. So I'm doing all this bleeding business. I went and stood in the shower because, cleaning it up off tiles easy. Cleaning it up off white carpet, bad news. So I was standing in the shower, considering my life choices and, the things that had brought me to this point. And early on, just days after my husband's death, a friend had come and she had read some Bible verses to me. And one of them, I think it's 2 Corinthians 10:3 or something close to that, but it says, "God will show you a way out." And I had clung to that with everything I had. And now, standing in this shower, I thought about that, "God will show you a way out." And I remember thinking, this is my way out. Because I had really considered ending my own life. And I thought, yeah, it messes people up so bad. as my husband's death had done to me. But I thought, hey, this I went to the doctor, I went to the hospital, I had a surgery, I'm doing everything to save my life, and they did this. So I was like, not a bad deal. So I'm thinking a lot about that. Maybe this was God's mercy that I get to be gone from here. And I thought, I really thought, thank goodness this is over now. It won't be long. And I was about ready to sit down in that shower. I was thinking about it, but I knew once I sat down, I wouldn't be able to get back up. But then I also thought about all the people, and there were a lot of people that had rallied to support me after my husband's death. And I thought, if I just succumb to death now, that's not very fair to them. And I also had two very dear friends at my house at this very moment. And I thought, is that really fair to them for them to come into this bathroom and see me, you know, in a bad state? So I pushed off the shower wall, went outside, wrapped a towel around myself because I'm still very worried about the carpet. It was a big deal. An ambulance was summoned and I was taken to a hospital. And actually, they gave me a shot of, they'd put in an IV and they gave me a drug that is considered synthetic morphine, a morphine derivative. And that just knocked me out. And, I've shared this story with a few live audiences, in person. And when I do, it's always fun to pick out the medical personnel in the crowd. Because when I say, and then they gave me a morphine derivative, the medical personnel all go, oh, because it's the worst thing you can do for somebody whose blood pressure's dropping, their respirations are dropping. It's just basically greases the skids to the afterlife, So they were doing all they could to get me to heaven. But my friend said I lost consciousness, and he said the next thing that happened was he gazed over at the blood pressure cuff. They had an automatic cuff on my arm, and he said it read 32/25, which is pretty much gone. And he was getting up to go summon the nurse, and he said that I tried to sit up on the gurney. There's a term called terminal lucidity. Have you ever heard of that?
I believe so only through research before this interview.
It's a burst of energy at the very end of life. People who were nonverbal communicate, people who were blind, maybe even able to see, people who were bedridden and had all manner of mobility issues, sometimes move. But in my case, here I am pretty close to death at this point, and I tried to sit up on the gurney, which I could not. But he said, then I put my hands up in the air and reached up to heaven. And he said, my friend, thank goodness he was witnessing this, but he said, you talked to somebody that only you could see. And he's transfixed by this. And he said, after that, I dropped my hands back to my side and appeared to be gone. Well, he said, about that time, the nurse came running into the room because I guess she heard the blood pressure cuff was getting error, which was my blood pressure reading now was error. And the kind of sort of maybe funny thing is when she came into the room, he said she fiddled with the electrical plug for the blood pressure cuff, like, well, this thing isn't working. And then, fiddled with some things on the machine. And then only then did she look at me and go, ruh this isn't good. So it was all very dramatic. And then my friend was ushered out and they brought in a crash cart, again, according to him, and, tried to get me back. But meanwhile, I was having a great time. I was having the time of my life. I don't even remember passing out from the drug. I just very close to my last words on earth were after they gave me that drug. My words were, "Man, that is some good stuff." But then I that's pretty much the last I remember. And then I remember waking up from what felt like a deep, dreamless state. And I popped out of my body like toast out of a toaster. It was very, very dramatic. And as I am literally arching through the air, the term I use is catapulted, which is the best way I can describe what happened. But I literally felt catapulted out of that body. And I'm floating away, and I realized, I mean, I knew instantly what had happened. And my first words out of my new mouth were, my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? And then I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And I'm also pretty interested in the fact that I am making sound. I'm hearing my own voice. I'm communicating with myself because I always found myself pretty darn funny and interesting. But all this is happening in the absence of breath sounds or vocal cords or eardrums, or all the other mechanisms by which we think sound is produced and heard. Oh, that's pretty interesting that I had already left that body behind, and yet I still carried those things with me. And then the next thought I had was, and I'm floating away in what I call perfect blackness, a velvety, encompassing, peace generating blackness. And it was so black, I literally couldn't see my hand in front of my face were I to try. But I remember thinking throughout most of my life, I've been terrified of the dark. I always sleep with a nightlight on or a door ajar, but I like being able to see a little bit of light. And I thought, I'm not afraid at all. In fact, I like this. This is very nice. This is very pleasant. One of the other thoughts I had is kind of funny, but I thought, I like floating. Floating is fun. And here I am, a writer. I've been a writer 35 years with what I consider to be a pretty expansive vocabulary, and that's what I got. I like floating. Floating is fun.
It's
But
probably
uh,
true. So,
yeah, and it was very childlike. It's
oh,
like we get to be our authentic, that childlike side of us, I guess, is given the freedom to emerge. But
hmm.
then the next thought I had, because I remember this so clearly, the next thought I had was, you're dying. And then being a longtime editor and grammarian, I said, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And then I laughed because I cracked myself up. Always have, probably always will. And again, I thought, I still have the same funny little giggle. In fact, I hear it. I enunciate it. I hear it. This is fantastic. And I can't tell you what a comfort it was to realize that every single thing I am, down to my funny little giggle, had gone with me. And then I remember thinking, what exactly did I leave behind on that gurney? And I thought, anxiety, fear, regret, guilt, woe, worry, all of that, because especially the guilt. After my husband ended his life, you rack your brain with coulda, woulda, shoulda. You wear yourself out thinking, could I have stopped this? Is there anything I could have done? And that was all gone now. That was all gone. And all I was left with was peace and a sense of just joy, a sense of lightness. It's like all those heavy earth weights had been dropped from me. But that little thing of hearing myself giggle was very powerful because I realized the stuff, the anxiety, the woe, the weary, the guilt, the regret, all that self recrimination, all of that wasn't really part of me. It just kind of got attached to me as I moved through this experience called life on earth. The other really interesting thing that happened, and I haven't talked about this a lot, after I was apparently dead, the nurse in the room started screaming my name, Rosemary, except it was desperate and frantic and loud. But the further I floated away from my body, the softer it got. And the other fascinating thing to me now is I didn't respond. I had already dropped persona of Rosemary. So to me, her screaming Rosemary, Rosemary, she must have said it 35 times. It was like an annoying alarm going off when you just want to sleep. It was like, rah, 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 that I had already made the separation, that Rosemary was gone. And now I was just this person I'd been in eternity. And, a little aside, after I came back, I asked my friend, I said, I heard Rosemary being screamed, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. I said, was that the nurse? And he said, she was screaming so loud. He said, I was out in the waiting room and I could hear her screaming. So she was screaming that very loudly. I think they were all pretty panicked that they had made a boo-boo and now I was dead. And one of the things I meant to mention in this timeline was right before I lost consciousness, the nurse and the doctor who had been in there deciding to give me that morphine derivative, and they were trying to sort out what to do and how to do it. This was just beyond their skill set. But I was pretty scared, and I looked at that nurse's face, who was holding my hand, by the way, as I laid on that gurney, and I said, "Promise me you're not going to let me die." And she looked at me and with as much love as a mother could have for her own dear child, and she said, "Oh, honey, we're not going to let you die. We have many solutions for this." I was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds pretty good." So when they were back in the room, I can only imagine the desperation to get me back for a lot of reasons, not just the obvious. So, but meanwhile, I'm floating further and further away from my body, pretty beyond happy. I was deliriously happy because I had so many thoughts. It's like my whole life, my IQ had been basically 60 amps, or not IQ, but my intellectual capacities had been running maybe at 60 amps, and now I had been upgraded to 100,000 amps. And I had so many thoughts so fast in every direction. But one of the things that occurred to me was I thought about the Bible verse, the peace of God that passeth all understanding shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. And I thought, this is that peace. Because we hear a lot about people who talk about the love they feel when they pass. I have always struggled with anxiety, bad anxiety. And that peace was like the antidote. It's like it washed away. I was no longer an anxious person. I was just a person full of peace. And I'm not even sure I was a person, I was a being. But this went on for some time. And, one of my favorite quotes is Einstein. He said, to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only illusion, however persistent. So we talk about these NDEs and we kind of say, well, this happened and then there was this and then there was this. But was it really an earthly timeline of events? Who knows? But somewhere in the experience, and it seemed like, I don't know, at the beginning, I guess, I felt a very massive presence join me, and that presence was very tall, to my left and slightly behind me. And I remember turning my head to see who had joined me, pretty fascinated by the fact that I'm turning my head to look over my left shoulder, and I thought, huh. So some element of our physical form is still present in this experience. But I could not see because I'm still in the blackness, and I asked this magnificent form. I said, "And who are you?" Because I was pretty happy. I was genuinely, seriously happy. And the answer was, before I could even finish the sentence, the question, the answer was, you, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I thought, well, it's Genesis 1:26. And I thought, my whole life, I wondered what it meant to be made in the image and likeness of God, but now I got it. And beyond the words, I understood what that meant. There's an original. I'm just the image and likeness. And it was very beyond comforting. It answered so many questions. And this thing just went on and on and on. And then I was because people say, well, how long were you gone? And on Earth terms, it was 10 to 15 minutes. In terms of where I was, it felt like it could have been hours and hours and hours. And who's to say it wasn't? Who's to say how much time it really was? But one of the things that happened, I was with these spiritual beings in this blackness, and like maybe an angel, maybe a spiritual guide. But I was with these spiritual beings, and I said to one of them, I said, this whole floating in the darkness, this deep peace, all this joy and stuff, I said, this is very familiar. Like in this bunch of memories from Earth, this is very familiar. And they told me, they said, you remember that story your dear mom told you that you were given up when you were a tiny infant for dead, that you became so critically ill, and then they said you weren't going to make it, and then you were just given up. And the angel said, you didn't actually come close to dying. You actually crossed over and you got sent back then. And I thought, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Because at this point, I was 59 years old, and my whole life I had been such an oddball in this world. I never fit in neatly anywhere. I didn't fit in neatly with other women, with even the children on the playground. I mean, I just remember always just being an outsider looking in. And that was so hard. And sometimes I would see things that other people can't see, like angels. And I remember there was a woman in the family. She was actually my then husband's auntie, and she had become so sick so fast. And I really liked her. And her name was Susie, actually. And Susie had passed on, but I had prayed every morning and every night for Susie to either have a peaceful passing or to be restored to good health. So I'm driving down. This is 25 years ago. I guess this happened, but I'm driving down the road in my little Geo Prism, and I suddenly felt Susie with me in the car. And I mean, I was in Illinois and she was in Virginia, allegedly. And she said so simply, it wasn't like a great big thing. She just said so simply, "Thank you for praying for me. I felt the love, but I'm going to be on my way now." And then she was gone. She's just gone. And I remember thinking, Susie's passed on. So I called my mother-in-law. I actually waited an hour so they could make sure that everybody knew. But I called my mother-in-law. Yeah, I called my mother-in-law and I said, "Susie passed, didn't she?" She said, "How could you know that?" I said, "I know." So I have always had those experiences. I just and I didn't understand why. So in this experience, 59 years old, I'm going to heaven, having a great time. The angel's like, "Yep, you died, been here, we sent you back." Like, well, that would have been good information to have 59 years ago, but okay. But that earth life is over, so what the heck, on we go. Because the other thing that happened, I know folks can appreciate this. I was a single woman. I mean, my husband had died and I wasn't in any state to find a partner, but I worried a lot about money. And so, in this experience of floating away from my body, I remember thinking, I got a lot of unpaid bills on my desk. Not a problem anymore. And also, I was supposed to start chemo and radiation. It was going to be once a day or daily radiation and then once a week chemo. And I was like, that's not going to be a problem either. And it was so funny to me because it was a tangible, practical relief to say, I'm out of this. These earthly worries, they're back there. So in this experience, there was so many layers to it. But one of the things that has remained a mystery for many years now, it's been 6 or 7 years, I guess 7, is that I went from floating in that blackness to being in a white room filled with this very fine mist. I don't remember the transition. I remember being in the blackness and floating, and then I remember being in the white room standing on something approximating 2 feet, and I don't know how it happened. And one of the most frequently asked questions I get is, "Did you see your husband? Did you see dead relatives?" No. And I kinda wonder if in that little amnesiac space between the floating in the blackness and being in the white room that we had a little get together, and then, maybe I said, "Well, I'm not going back." And then they said, "Yeah, we're gonna erase this." Like, what is that neuralizer they have on Men in Black Kablooey, but I don't know. I don't know what happened there. Something happened. So
If you don't mind me asking, like, a lot of people I speak to say that their NDE was kind of the perfect one for them, and it's custom to the person. Do you think that was maybe why you didn't see those people, or do you think that was what was needed to be for your spiritual journey?
I do believe that these experiences are tailor-made because, jumping ahead a little bit, after I was revived, I remember being loaded into the ambulance. Because the funny thing is, when you are revived, like this was a very modest little ER, and like I said, no hospital nearby. They couldn't wait to get me out of that hospital. They had gone from kind of dilly-dallying around to saying, "Get her out of here. Send her to a trauma hospital." So they loaded me very quickly in the back of an ambulance, and I remember as I was being loaded in that ambulance thinking, my entire life, I've been fascinated by NDEs, and I just had one, and it is nothing like I thought it would be. And I get a lot of email, and people can reach me through my website. But one of the most common, not common, I get this about 1% of the time. People say, "How do we know you're not making this up? You're a writer; you could make up stuff." And I mean, there's a lot of reasons because one, I didn't even want to write a book, seriously. But secondly, if I was gonna write this as a story, it wouldn't have this floating in blackness and hearing my own giggle and then being in a white room. I would have done the tunnel and the beautiful music and the prairie full of wildflowers and seeing my dead relatives. But, I remember being loaded in that ambulance at that first ER and thinking, "This was nothing like what I've always read about." And what's really cool, one of the blessings of doing all these podcasts, and I've done, 60 to 70 now, one of the great blessings is I get so many emails from people who say, "I had an NDE and I was in that white room too." And I had never heard much about it till after I told my own story. But yeah, so if I was going to write and make this up, I would have gone much more traditional. But yeah, I do remember very clearly as I was loaded into that ambulance thinking, that was weird. But yeah, in this white room on my own 2 feet, I saw the infamous door ahead of me, probably 10 to 15 feet in front of me. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I have feet or legs or what the mechanism is, but I know I can perambulate with intention toward that door, which is actually a pretty good word. And I did. I wanted to get to that door because I was pretty much like, everybody out of my way. We're doing the door. I'm out of here. I'm not going back. I cannot begin. Some people are in love with life. I ain't one of them. I have never felt like this is my home. There's an old African American spiritual. This earth is not my home. I'm just a passing through. And I get that. I mean, this is like being a stranger in a strange land, as my friend Ellen calls it, this insane asylum that we're all kind of wandering around on. But yeah, so I couldn't wait to get to that door. And as I was approaching the door, I mean, one of the things that happened, this mist was like encircling me, enveloping me, and it was active. It wasn't just falling, it was kind of spinning and swirling around me. And I remember looking at the mist and trying to focus on an individual droplet of the vapor. And I know that sounds so nuts, but I felt like I should be able to see an individual droplet. And the angel that was with me at this point said, uh, Your eyes have not acclimated to this new spiritual environment yet. But what you're looking at are not droplets, they are particles of light, and they're removing the muck of the earth. And everyone who goes to heaven has to have the muck of earth removed before they can go on. I was like, whoa, it was likened to a spiritual car wash of light to help restore us. And the best parallel I can draw is so many people get actually attached to their illnesses and they make it part of their identity. Well, I've had this fill in the blank for 6 years. I know everything there is to know about it. I'm thinking, how sad. I never want to be attached to a disease process. It's an invader. It's an unwelcome parasite. And I refuse to host any parties for disease. I mean, I heard Wayne Dyer say that years ago, but I think that's a great quote. I refuse to host some parasitic element of something dark. It's never going to be a blessing. It's just here to hurt me. But it was explained to me that some people are so intimately connected to their disease process that they have to be cleansed of that. They have to be washed free of that. So the other thing that was made clear to me, because I had been a pretty messed up, mentally ill person after the trauma of my husband's ending, was that if I agreed to go back to Earth, I would be restored to wholeness. I thought, okay, good to know. What's next? So I got to this door and I was a little annoyed that it was shut because I remember him called Going Home when it talks about passing through an open door. I thought, yeah, that door needs to be open. So I put up my right hand to push through the door, pretty interested by the fact right handed on earth, right handed in heaven. And I paused and I asked the angel that was with me, is this the divine will for my life that a medical mistake sends me on? And the angel, I didn't even finish the sentence. I just said, is this the divine? And the answer was immediate. The answer was no, it's not. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's love and mercy and grace and care. I thought, cool, I'll take that deal. And just as I was preparing to again move forward, I was I was given a vision of that nurse that had helped me, that had smiled at me with that tender motherly smile and said, we're not going to let you die. And in this vision, and vision is way too weak a word, it was like I was put in a space with her. And this was a potential future event. This was not concurrent. But in this experience, she was sitting in the hospital supply room surrounded by towels and medical supplies and all the stuff. And I can only witness this. I know she can't hear me, but she's sitting on a little metal stool, leaning forward, sobbing uncontrollably. And through tears, I hear her say, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die. And I lost her. I was like, oh man. I was like, well, you know what? She looks about my age. She's lost patience before she'll get over it. I got to get out of here. I have got to go. I have got to leave this crazy place. I am not going back to that crazy earth. But then, in an instant, I wasn't just observing this nurse, I actually felt her grief and regret. And I remember thinking, I know that pain. I know that soul hollowing pain of feeling like you you failed to help someone. You failed to save a life. So I remember saying, if I can spare one person that much pain, I guess I have to go back. And I dropped my right hand by my side, and in a millisecond, I was back on that gurney. But now that nurse, and now I'd gone from being alone in that room with my buddy. There was, I guess, 6 or 7 people in that room, the medical staff. Lots of excitement, lots of fun stuff happened. And I'd been moved to a new room. I'd been moved from the little cubicle to the big cubicle. So it's great. And when the nurse leaned forward, she looked in my face and she said, "What is your name?" And I said, "Rosemary." She said, "Oh, what year is it?" And I said, 2018. And she said, "Where are you?" And I said, a crummy excuse for an ER. But I had been gone more than 10 minutes. And the thing about that is I actually interviewed an emergency room doctor and a couple of ER nurses for my book. When somebody dies from bleeding to death, which was officially my cause of death, you can't do CPR because you just push more blood out of their body. So what you do is, as was explained to me, you plug the leak, you refill the tank, and then you restart the heart. So potentially my brain was without oxygen for more than 10 minutes. And not only did I come back without any brain damage, but I really feel like I got a serious upgrade in the experience. So then I got, as I mentioned, put in the ambulance, sent to a real hospital, and was given, for the most part, good care. And it was quite an experience. But and it took about, I actually went back to my oncologist after I got out of the hospital 4 days later. And I said, "Good news, we don't need to do the chemo and radiation. I was healed in heaven." And he would not hear it. He was very dismissive. And I mean, I can understand his viewpoint. So I had to dismiss him as my doctor. And I went and found another doctor in another part of the state because this doctor I had in on the East Coast was very, very impressive man. And this other doctor ended up doing another surgical biopsy. And she took a lot of flesh from a lot of different places while she was in there. But yeah, I remember I was, she spent 3 hours digging around looking for something. And she actually, after the surgery was over and I was back in recovery, I remember she shook me awake, this doctor who had now done the second surgical biopsy. And she had tears in her eyes and she said, "You're right. We looked so many places and there's not one cell of cancer." And then she even sent off the what do you call them, the biopsy samples or whatever to another outside lab to make sure her findings were accurate. So yeah, the cancer was completely gone, and that's been, I think, 7 years now. So there was a lot more to the story, but that's kind of the short version.
That's incredible. First of all, just is there any sort of scientific explanation for your cancer suddenly being healed? How
Oh,
were they
yeah.
able to rationalize that in any way?
Oh, yeah. I really believe that, we're so into this Western model of medicine, and it does a lot of good. It does a lot of good. But I really do believe the next great frontier is gonna be spiritual healing. There was a book written, it wasn't Bernie Siegel. No, no, it was Bernie Siegel, but there was I think it was Bernie Siegel was the oncologist, and he would often send he wrote this book called Love, Medicine, and Miracles. He would often send patients home who'd been diagnosed with, terminal cancer and say, "Listen, you got about 90 days before you're going to go. Just live your best life. Try to have some fun." Or, 6 months or whatever. Well, he noticed there were two types of people. One type would go home and die on schedule, very faithfully. I mean, I remember my precious father-in-law, they said, You'll be gone around you'll be gone pretty close to Thanksgiving." He died the day after Thanksgiving. And Larry Dawsey calls it medical hexing, that when we say, "You'll be dead by," but, Bernie Siegel noticed that when he'd send patients home to die, like I said, some would die on schedule, but the others, he'd see them 10 years later out fishing in some great stream or riding on an airplane or at the Cayman Islands. I mean, he run into his patients. He said, "What? You were supposed to be dead 8.5 years ago. What happened?" And he kept hearing the same stories again and again and again and again and again. And the story was, Doc, when you told me I had 3 months to live, I figured I better go live my best life. He said, I quit that job. I sold the house. I divorced my wife. I married my girlfriend. I mean, they all changed something about their life. It was divorce or marriage or whatever, but they changed. They quit their job. They went and did something they'd always wanted to do. And they got into it so much that the disease had no choice but to just fizzle up and die. And so I really believe you asked about the scientific basis. I think that we tend to abandon prayer-based healing, spiritual healing, whatever you want to call it, way too soon. So the scientific explanation is I think we kind of got to make room for these miracles instead of being dismissive of them. We just got to make room for them and say, I mean, with God all things are possible. And I just think I had a friend who worked at CBN. Uh, she worked the call center. When people would call in and ask for prayer, she was the one who answered the phone because she was from that area, Virginia Beach. Actually, it's in Chesapeake. But she said, when I told her my story, she said, I'm not surprised. I said, everybody's surprised. Why aren't you surprised? She said, I work the call center at CBN and we get call after call after call. Somebody would say, you prayed for me last week. The doctor said I had, stage 4 cancer. But they just did a new scan. It's all gone. So she said there's so many stories and they don't get good press or people don't want to share it. I mean, I have gotten some ugly hate mail from people. I have gotten some really rough letters from people. So I understand not wanting to go public, but I'll bet you if you looked out in the world that you would find a lot of these stories. And I tell about one in my book. Can't remember her name. But in chapter 8 of my book, I talk about a woman, and this was in, I think, 37, but she had a tumor in her abdomen that was over 40 pounds, and it was pretty bad, and it was going to kill her. Well, no doubt about it. Well, she was being attended by a medical doctor, but she also had somebody praying for her. She had a church praying for her. Well, one night, she had this very intense dream about helping Jesus. And when she woke up the next morning, that 40-pound tumor was gone. And she stayed in bed, let the doctor, this is the 30s, let a doctor come to the house and examine her. Most remarkable thing, there was no drainage, there was no discharge. The thing had just disappeared. So I really think we have to find a way to enlarge thought a little bit and say, can I even admit it's possible to be healed just through prayer? So, yeah, I think what does science mean? Science means knowledge, knowing. I just think we have to expand our thought a little bit and consider the possibility that this is the new frontier. It's not cutting into people and slicing them open. It's admitting that there's so much more to us than flesh and bone and blood and all the rest of it.
I love that. I love that what you said, make room for miracles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna be thinking about that, coming back to that a lot, I think. When you came back, you were in the hospital for a period of, I believe you said 4 days. What was that time like? Because some of the people I speak to have other spiritual experiences after they've come back in the immediate days. Did anything like that happen to you?
Oh yeah, there's probably this is probably the number one reason I wrote the book. There was so much to talk about. And also it helped me to think about it. Writing that book was a blessing for me. It took me 3 years. I wrote the first manuscript of the book, read it and said, "This is awful." And I threw it out. Read the second manuscript, same thing. Wrote the third manuscript, I said, we might have something we can work with here." 3 years. 3 years I did this. I worked on it. But anyway, there's so many things that happened, but I guess the one that meant a lot to me, and I hear that people love it. I don't know. I think it was the second night I was in the hospital, but it's pretty early on. Uh, I had friends that would come sit with me in the hospital and just keep me company. And when you're in a semi conscious state, I mean, when you're kind of drifting a little bit mentally, it's good to have somebody as an advocate sit with you at the hospital in case decisions have to be made. But every now and then, my dear friends would have to go down to the cafeteria or take a break or whatever. And when they would leave, these angels would appear at my bedside. angels on the left, angels on the right, and angels at the foot of the bed. And they would sing me songs, and all their songs glorified God. And they were very tall, 6.5 to 7 feet tall. But as they sang me songs, their gowns, which were made of light, glowed brighter and brighter. And the more they glorified God, the more the gowns would glow. And the more the gowns glow, the more they would praise and sing to the glory of God. And I remember saying to one of them, or all of them, but I said, I'm really good with houses because that's my thing is architectural history. Not so good with melody and lyrics. I'm not going to be able to remember this, and I don't want to forget a note of it. And what they said was, this is not for you to remember. This is for your healing. This is for your peace. This is for your joy. And they said, we know that life on earth is hard, and this is our thank you for agreeing to come back. And that's probably the number one comment that brings emails into my world is people are so relieved that the angels know that life on this earth is very hard. And it is. It is. So that was one of the things. The other thing that happens pretty interesting. When I went into that hospital, not surprisingly, the numbers on my blood work were barely, I don't even know they were enough to sustain life because I just died. The numbers on my blood work were pretty horrible. Well, 2 weeks out from that, they did more blood work. I remember what I was gonna say is after that came out, the doctors very gently explained to me in the hospital it would take, 2 to 3 months for the numbers to be right again, because that's apparently how long it takes, bone marrow to regenerate red and white blood cells. So I thought, "Eh," and I talked to a friend, and a friend said, "Oh, we'll just see about that," because he was a very powerful spiritual prayer warrior. So I think it was 15 days after this, just about 2 weeks, I went back and got some more blood work done. And when the doctor looked at the blood work, she said, "Ah, there's a mistake on your blood work." I said, "Well, what is it?" She said, "Your numbers are textbook perfect." I said, "Oh, that's not a mistake. I'm back riding my bike again. I feel great." She said, "What?" But yeah, after I came out of the hospital, I was passing out all the time, because red blood cells carry oxygen to the heart and to the lungs. I guess yeah, I'm not sure, but heart and lungs are involved if you pass out if you don't have enough of them. That I know. But yeah, so in 14 days, my blood work was perfect. So there was a lot going on. And the biggest thing, I came back feeling different. I had felt so burdened, so heavy laden with all the sorrow and sadness. And something the angels told me about my husband, they said what he did was awful. They said, but all of that, because the other thing that happened, he was a lawyer and he was pretty successful. And when he died, I lost my social status, my financial status. I lost my home and I lost all our friends. They said, see ya, wouldn't want to be ya. And they disappeared. The people who rushed in to save me were the people who'd kind of been on the periphery of my life, and save me they did. They really did. But so the angels said all this messiness of what happened after his death has been encapsulated. It's a thing, but it can't hurt you anymore. And I love that word because in architecture, especially historic architecture, sometimes if you find a contaminant, it's better to encapsulate it than try to remove it. Sometimes the process of removing a toxic substance distributes more of it to the air, releases more of it to the air. So I thought it was so cool that the angels were talking my language. But yes, they said all the messiness of that had been encapsulated and it wouldn't hurt me again. Boy, was that comforting. So yeah, I after I came back from this, I came back a different person. And I sold all my not all, but I sold a lot of my personal possessions. And I moved to the Midwest from the East Coast because I like watching corn grow. And people think that's a joke, and it's not. And in fact, I put it on my dating profile, and people still thought it was a joke. But yes, there's something about trouncing a seed into the dirt and then stomping on it. That's what I had been. I had been given up on, except by those sweet friends. So yeah, and I did. I sold off a lot of stuff. Sold my home. I finally had a nice house, and then I moved to the Midwest and started a new life. And I have zero regrets about that. And what's really fun is I had one daughter living out here when I moved out here, And then afterwards, my other daughter joined us. So I've got two daughters who live out here with me now, which is awfully nice.
I love that. I'm so happy that you had those kind of unexpected friends who stepped up for you.
They did.
I'm so grateful for you sharing your story. I think the last question I'd love to ask is, um, what would you tell people who fear death today?
That's a good question. I have a friend, Ellen, who had a profound NDE, I guess they're all life-changing NDEs. But I was asking her, um, I said, when I go to funerals, I don't know what to think because when I look at the front at that guy or person in the casket, all I can think is, man, you're a lucky duck. Because I know where you are and I know you're having fun. And my friend Ellen said, "Oh, she said, I've never been to a funeral without thinking pretty much the same thing. Yeah, you get envious of them. You just get envious." And she also said, I mean, here we are living on this earth with a lot of crazy folks. And, you wake up and then you have some stuff happen that you're like, I really wish that hadn't happened. And her saying, I think it's a quote from another writer, but she says, and what fresh hell is this? But yes, life on earth is hard. So yeah, when I hear a story about somebody who's transitioned, I just think, man, you got to go home. And I remember when I was crossing over, I mean, I was, early on in the process. I do remember thinking, people think I'm making this stuff up, but I was so grateful to be dead. I mean, like, so very grateful. And I remember thinking, I felt like I'd been granted early release for good behavior, that I'd made it out at 59. And I just, something I want to go back to, I talked about those three prayers: heal me or let me die, no more hard decisions, and no life review. All those prayers got answered. Like when I was at that door, and I was ready to go on to finish the experience. And the angel said, whatever you decide, you'll be richly blessed. I thought, what a beautiful way to answer that second prayer. I can't handle any more hard decisions. And the angels say, either way, you're going to be blessed. And the first one, heal me or let me go. I got them both. And then the third one, no life review. I got that too.
Wow. Rosemary, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
This was an amazing conversation, and I'll be sure to link your website and your book in the description as well for anyone who's interested.
Okay, it sounds great.
Thank you so much to Rosemary Ringer for this amazing conversation, and thank you for watching this video on T&H Afterlife. Most of the people who watch our videos aren't subscribed, so if you want to help us share stories like this, please like this video and subscribe to our channel.